Is there a way to tell if the tribulation actually started? Yeah, there's definitely a way, and we'll show it to you today. The prophetic Christian world has just been shaken. You're probably thinking I'm talking about the Charlie Kirk murder, but more important than that, much more important, is the United Nations endorsing the creation of an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel, the two-state solution. Hailed as historic by diplomats but alarming to millions of Christians who follow their Bible. Could this be the covenant spoken of in Daniel 9:27? Could this be the trigger that restarts the prophetic clock, the final 7 years of man's rule on the earth prior to the return of Jesus? You know, what we call the tribulation. We can surmise all we want about this. But is there a way to know if it is or it isn't? Well, today we're going to show you that there is definitely a way. For centuries, believers have studied Daniel's prophecy, watching for the moment the final countdown would begin. And while this spotlight has been on the 70 weeks of Daniel in Daniel 9:27, where the 77s were decreed by God, there's something else. And most don't know this. The 70 weeks is where the idea of this final 7 years comes from. You know, what our culture calls the tribulation. But there's a deeper, broader clock running silently in the background, a macro clock that reveals all of Israel's history. And Gabriel showed this to Daniel, not just the 70 weeks, but 70 jubilees from Israel's entrance into the land until Messiah's final return and the establishment of his kingdom. In fact, in a future video, we're going to explain that there are actually 4 clocks all running at the same time, simultaneously in that passage. Still, today, we're going to zoom in on the macro clock, the great Jubilee clock cycle, because if we understand when it began and how it ends, we will know exactly where we stand on God's prophetic timeline, because it gives the day and the year of our Savior's return, if we calculate it correctly. And for this video, we need to give a shout out to Ryan Rigo, a member of our advisory board, for this just absolutely mind-blowing teaching. But first, I'm sure many of you watching are saying to yourselves, Nelson, this is just nonsense. Jesus said that no one knows the day or the hour, so why try to figure it out? In fact, at my men's group this week, somebody said that to me. So it's very common for you to think that. That's exactly what everybody thinks. And Jesus did say that. In Matthew 24 and 25, he said it 3 times, not just 1 time. But it's that 1 time everybody quotes. The final 2 times, however, clarify what he meant when he said that. Wouldn't that be something you would like to know? In Matthew 25:13, he said it this way: "Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour." Because back in Jesus' day, no one knew the day or the hour. And we were commanded to watch for signs of his coming, so we would have an idea when he was coming. So why watch? So that we could know. And although I've heard we can't know the day or the hour quoted thousands, if not tens of thousands of times, I've never heard the watch part before, except on this channel. Jesus was telling us that the only way to know the time of his coming is to see the signs of his coming. Then we can know. And that's exactly what we're doing today with the Jubilee clock. All right, so let's begin. What is a Jubilee? It sounds like it's a good time, doesn't it? Well, the angel Gabriel told Daniel the prophet that 77s were decreed for his people Israel. Most Christians realize that this refers to 7-year increments of years, which the Israelites called the Shabuim. And 70 of these were decreed, and that the 70th Shabuim, the final Shabuim of Daniel, is the tribulation. But that's not yet completed. But this decree has a double meaning, because there's another 7 in Hebrew timekeeping another 7 known as the Jubilee. The Jubilee is a collection of 7 of these Shabuim, or 7-year long week years. So it's 49 years, 7 times 7. And if we're looking at the macro clock of Daniel, the 77s are Jubilees. 70 Jubilees are decreed for the nation of Israel from its beginning to its end. So we need to know what one of these Jubilees is. In Leviticus 25, God commands Israel to measure time, not just in years, but in cycles. Every 7th year was a sabbatical cycle. The land was to rest, debts were forgiven, slaves were released. But after 7 cycles of 7 years, something far greater happened, the year of Jubilee. On the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, the shofar would be sounded. It would proclaim liberty. Property was restored to families. Prisoners were set free, and the land reset. It was a complete societal and covenantal restart. Now here is a prophetic key. Listen to this closely. Although it's the 50th year, according to the Bible, the Jubilee is legally also the first year of the next cycle. So it's the 50th year and the first year of the next cycle. Why? Because Leviticus 25, 8 through 10 defines the Jubilee as 7 Sabbaths of years, 7 times 7 years. Then you shall hear the trumpet. The Jubilee does not stand apart as some floating 50th year. It resets the whole count for another cycle. So each Jubilee cycle is 49 years long, not 50. And this can be confirmed by reading the ancient Hebrew book of Jubilees, just like the disciples did, just like Jesus did, because he quoted from it. Although it's not canon, it was clear that the Jubilee cycles were only 49 years, not 50, and the book would never have been popular, as it was if it wasn't correct on this point. How ridiculous to have a book about Jubilees and have it get it wrong. It had to be right. It may have been wrong about some other things. There were things in that book that maybe weren't correct, but it could not be wrong about how Jewish people celebrated the Jubilee, or it would have been laughed off the bookshelves. So a Jubilee cycle is 49 years. And if 70 of these were decreed for Israel from its start to its finish, that would equal 3,430 years. If one Jubilee is 49 years, then 70 Jubilees equals 70 times 49, 3,430 years. That is the length of the great prophetic clock revealed to Daniel, a sweeping span of time stretching from Israel's inheritance of a land until the return of Jesus the Messiah at the second coming. This clock can't be paused because it's tied to the land itself. It ticks relentlessly across history, but like all timelines, we need a starting date, the length of a timeline, and the end point in order to know everything we need to know about it. That's what we're looking for today. We want to know that end point, so we have to know the length and the starting point. So, when did the clock begin? To understand the 70 Jubilees of prophecy, we must know when to start counting. That's important. God gave Israel clear instructions. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give to you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. Leviticus 25:2. This decree of the Lord is the start of the clock running. The start of the clock that measures all of the time allotted to Israel. The sabbatical and Jubilee cycles could not begin during the wilderness years when they were wandering and not yet in the land, nor did it start with the moment that Israel crossed the Jordan. It only could begin when Israel took possession of the land, settled in it, and began sowing and reaping, because the Jubilee is related to sowing and reaping. Only once they began sowing and reaping could they discontinue it to fulfill the Jubilee. And if we know when that starts, if we know when they started sowing and reaping, we'll also know when it ends. Now, so this is a big issue, and this is why, to the best of my knowledge, no one has ever gotten this right before Ryan Rigo, because he was the one that realized sowing and reaping was the key to the clock starting. Now, let's place some dates to these hypothetical timelines by proving the date of entry. The key comes from 1 Kings 6:1. And it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, he began to build the house of the Lord. Solomon's reign is well anchored historically. His 4th year is 967 BC. And if you count backwards, 480 years, as the passage says, it places the Exodus at 1446 BC. That also is well established by most Christian scholars. Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, Numbers 14:33 through 34. So subtract 40 from 1446, the time of the Exodus. And that brings us to 1406 BC, the exact year Israel crossed the Jordan under Joshua's leadership and entered the land. Joshua 3 and 4. So that's step 1. Step 2. Entry versus inheritance. But entering is not the same as possessing. They had to fight the Battle of Jericho. They had to fight the Battle of Ai. There were a lot of battles that they had to fight. Leviticus 25:2, though, is clear. The land must be under Israel's control for the sabbatical jubilee cycles to begin. Israel did not immediately sow or reap, so it couldn't keep the Sabbath. First came years of conquest, as we talked about. Only after the fighting did Joshua divide the land among the tribes. Well, how long did this take? Step 3, Caleb as the time marker. The inheritance date is locked down by Caleb's testimony. Caleb was the head of the tribe of Judah. And this is found in Joshua 14:10 through 13. The Lord has kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years, ever since the Lord spoke the word to Moses when Israel wandered in the wilderness. And now, here I am, this day, 85 years old. Now, therefore, give me this mountain. Caleb was 40 at the time of the spying out of the land in Numbers 13. 45 years later, he's now 85. And that's when he received Hebron as his inheritance. These dates place the distribution of the tribal land in 1400 BC, 6 years after the crossing. And that makes a lot of sense. Okay, step 4. The first Jubilee count from 1400 BC, the tribes settled. They sowed and reaped. Only then could the sabbatical and Jubilee cycles begin. Israel was to farm for 6 years, rest the land on the 7th, according to Leviticus 25:3 and 4. And after 7 sabbatical cycles, 49 years, the Jubilee trumpet would sound on the Day of Atonement. Then you shall cause the trumpet of Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, and proclaim liberty throughout the land. Leviticus 25:9 through 10. Okay, let's summarize all this. There were a lot of numbers. I know that. So the Exodus was 1446 BC. That's 1 Kings 6:1. They wandered in the wilderness 40 years, and then they entered into Canaan in 1406 BC. That's Joshua chapters 3 and 4. There was 6 years of conquest and distribution before the inheritance year, which was 1400 BC, according to Joshua 14. The start of the Jubilee count then is 1400 BC, when Israel first sowed and reaped their tribal lands. Thus, the 70 Jubilee cycles of 49 years, or 3,430 years, began at the inheritance year of 1400 BC and ran unbroken until a future year, which happens to be 2031 AD. Wow, that's just a couple years from now, when the 70th Jubilee trumpet will sound and Israel will receive its final inheritance. counting forward. From 1400 BC, as we said, we simply add the span of 70 Jubilees, 3,430 years. And that was 2031 AD. We even know the day because Jubilees has to begin on the Day of Atonement. That's the termination of the Great Jubilee clock, the year when the 70th Jubilee concludes. It's the year the Messiah's kingdom is finally established in its fullness. This is breathtaking because it means that 70 Jubilees, the macro clock of history, converges with the very years in which the world is now trembling, as global conflicts are being signed and peace treaties are being signed and the prophetic pieces are falling into place. And this isn't the only proof pointing to September 27th, 2031, the Day of Atonement. Most spectacular of all are the star alignments, acting as signs in the sky on both the Feast of Trumpets 2030, a likely rapture date, and 24, the day we think the tribulation started, to the Feast of First Fruits 2028, which is likely the abomination of desolation. Then 1,260 days to Yom Kippur and Armageddon, 1,290 days to Chesvan 10 and the sheep and goat judgment, and 1335 to Hanukkah and the rededication of the temple. All of these come from the book of Daniel. If you aren't paying attention, they're right there in the book of Daniel. Then there is even a fourth proof that Jesus died exactly 2,000 years prior to his likely return date at the rapture of 2030, based on 7 proofs given in the Jewish Talmud. Amazingly, those proofs were given to witnesses who were in opposition to Jesus. So, with these 4 proofs in hand, is this 100% evidence? No, but it's probably 95% proof. We will know in 2028, on that Feast of First Fruits, if the abomination happens. That's when we'll know. But it's going to be way too late for many. If this great macro clock points to 2031 as the terminus, then we are already inside the final 7 years. And if that's true, you need to be getting ready right now. Because September 27th, 2031 is only 6 years away. And this, folks, is why the recent UN endorsement of a 2-state solution is important. It's electrified Christians worldwide because they think it's the start of a tribulation. But it appears tribulation already started. And that it already started last year. And this is just further strengthening of the covenant that happened then. So the countdown's real. The clocks are converging. The king is coming. Blow the trumpet in Zion. Sound the alarm on my holy mountain, for the day of the Lord is at hand. Joel 2:1. But maybe you need to see the rest of that evidence about the incredible star signs before you decide. They happen in 2030 and 2031. So click right here and see how a recapitulation of a sign in Virgo of 2017, you probably remember it, takes place in 2030 to mark the rapture, and a sign of Armageddon happens in 2031 when Jesus crushes the head of the serpent in the sky. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.